There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers. There might be spoilers.
So I don't know why it took me so long to watch this movie, Andras, because this movie is right up my alley in terms of the kinds of things that I like to watch. Maybe not the kinds of things I necessarily have read a whole lot of, but this is definitely the kind of movie that I enjoy, not just because it has a fantastic cast, but it's well written and well directed and set in a time and place that is so stylistically interesting that you can't help but fall in love with the atmosphere, and the way the movie opens obviously kind of sells it on that. But I'm kind of shocked that it's taken me, till I was 33 to see this movie.
No more shocked than I. This is when I asked you if you'd seen this film and you're like, you hadn't seen it. I just thought, how is that possible? You're an incredibly well viewed person, but I think this is the case with everyone. We all have these blind spots, and it's kind of a blessing that we do, because then you can have this moment of being turned on to a film that's been right under your nose forever, and then you watch it and it immediately becomes, I don't know if this has become one of your favorites, but it immediately jumps into the rank of films that you consider to be ones you would like to go back to.
Well, what's crazy is I've seen almost everyone in this movie in other things, obviously, but I would go out on a limb and say most of the actors in this movie, this is the best thing I've ever seen them in.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a couple actors in particular, Guy Pearce being one of them, where, I mean, I've seen him in plenty of things, and I'm not saying he's not a fantastic actor. He just kind of tends to get lost in the shuffle sometimes. And because recently it's playing like a villain or again, like a side character. In this movie, he's the main character, and he is so good and so compelling and such an interesting character throughout. And the character that's, the primary, protagonist of the movie, but I would say that there are three, but every time he's on screen, he just, I don't know, something about him and the way he carries himself is so interesting and so different from anything I've ever seen him do, even.
Yeah, you'd think, if you didn't know history, you'd think that he was the breakout star,
right,
from this film.
Totally. Oh, no, completely. That's what I was trying to think about, on this episode of the Culture Cast, where I'm still your host, Chris Stashio, and I'm joined for the first time on this show, but like the fifth or sixth conversation we've had. But to the first time on this show, thank you, Patreon, for something other than money for once. And Mike White, my friend and soon to be yours, the host of The World Is Wrong, Andras Jones.
Well, it's great to be on the Culture Cast. I've listened to many episodes, and so it's an honor to be here.
Before we get into the movie and go further into LA Confidential, I wanted to give you a moment to tell the CultureCast audience a little bit about your show that you work on.
Yes, I host a podcast called The World Is Wrong, which is an extremely positive podcast celebrating films and film artists the world is wrong about. So films and film artists that we are often told are bad, are despicable, or we're never told about at all. And I started the show with my co-host, Brian Connolly, and am continuing it in different ways on my own over the last year and a half. We recently did a whole season on the filmmaker Paul Williams, who is not to be confused with the songwriter Paul Williams or the rock critic Paul Williams or the architect Paul Williams, hence the name of the podcast season being The Other Paul Williams. This Paul Williams was a really important director at the beginning of what is usually referred to as New Hollywood, and directed several films. He gave Jon Voight his first role in a film called Out of It, which is fantastic. Anyway, you can find out all about him and his work in our fourth season of the World Is Wrong podcast. But most episodes are devoted to an individual film, some to individual film artists, but mostly to individual films. And I encourage people to check out the website, theworldiswrongpodcast.com. I just go through and find a film that ideally find a film that you love, that you are sick of hearing people talk shit about, and enjoy us talking lovingly about that much maligned film. So that's The World Is Wrong.
And what's funny is when you and I were in this Patreon movie podcaster group, we were having to share our shows, and you had shared an episode of your show for us to listen to. And I listened to some of that episode, but then I actually went and listened to one about the two Jakes, which feels a little kind of ironic given what we're talking about now on this episode.
Oh yeah, this is very too Jakesy. I mean, very Chinatown-y. This is definite. In fact, when we talk about it, I think one of the things this film does really well is wade into Chinatown territory without feeling like they're stepping on the toes of that film or cribbing from it. Basically, a very similar film, but done very differently. And I think that's one of the successes of LA Confidential, because a lot of films, when they venture into the LA noir thing, end up somehow having to be compared favorably or unfavorably to Chinatown. Whereas until I started preparing for this podcast, I never even really thought of Chinatown in relationship to LA Confidential.
Well, and I think there's, and again, this might be me just kind of projecting, but I feel like there's also a character in this movie who the actor who plays him looks surprisingly like Jack Nicholson. There's a character in the movie where I'm like, that's kind of interesting. He looks kind of like older Jack Nicholson.
Who?
The Daryl Sandine who plays Leland Buzz Meeks. He has like the slicked back hair and everything.
Oh.
And they're like, oh, he's like an ex-LAPD cop who he's like all corrupt now. And I was like, I don't think it's supposed to be like, Jake Gittes from The Two Jakes and Chinatown. But it was just weird because he kind of looks like Jack Nicholson.
Okay.
I think it's just the hair and the nose, I think.
He's sort of like a much uglier Jack Nicholson.
well, I mean, yeah, that's the other thing.
I mean, no
Jack
offense.
Nicholson is also a good-looking guy.
I think he gets cast as like uglier kind, like that's sort of the way that sort of a kind of casting for that. Like he has a face made for a heavy.
That's right. Exactly.
So not to get into too much of a digression, but are you a fan of Two Jakes?
I think the problem with The Two Jakes is it's not Chinatown. Do you know what I mean? Like the problem is it's a sequel to a movie that is one of the greatest movies ever made. So it's really hard to follow such a strong act. I don't think it's, my opinion is that it's fine. It's a sequel that came out way after the fact. I mean, I know about the behind the scenes of it because of the Sam Wesson book, where they talk a little bit about it, and then they talk about it in something else. I forget what, but I mean, the history behind it I think is interesting, but I don't think it's as bad of a movie as everybody says. But it's not by any stretch of the imagination a really good movie.
No, it's not. I think it is a really good movie. I think it's a really good follow up to Chinatown, but Chinatown is a full bore masterpiece statement of its time. And
right,
yeah, it took, like if they had done the sequel in the early 80s with an early 80s Jack Nicholson and Dustin Hoffman in the Harvey Keitel role, I think that would have been the perfect one. But as an imperfect follow-up, I think I was happy to go back to that world, to the world of Jake Gittes, and follow him through Hollywood again. But that brings us back to LA Confidential, which is that maybe I'm just very, very sympathetic to Hollywood noirs, in part because I love noir films, and in part because I have a long relationship with the landscape of Hollywood and the history of Hollywood. So they're both very compelling to me, which maybe is a good place to talk about other Hollywood noirs that you might think of when you are approaching LA Confidential. Do you have favorites beyond Chinatown?
I was trying to think, about those kinds of movies, and I'm less familiar with what I would call the original ones, but the classics. I'm less familiar with the classics and kind of more familiar with like newer noir movies.
Such as?
Okay. Well, I mean, again, like I don't know. I mean, I'm a huge fan of, again, sci-fi noir, something like Blade Runner. I'm a huge fan of.
Mm-hmm.
I would consider The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the David Fincher movie that came out 2012, 2011. I would consider that a pretty good noir movie. I mean, again, it's a different kind of noir. It's kind of that Swedish noir. I'm a huge fan of Zodiac, which is just right up the coast from LA. Another, David Fincher noir movie. We had talked about this. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is another movie I'm a huge fan of, as I know you are as well.
Oh, so, yeah.
It's not that I'm not well versed in noir. Again, it's just I haven't seen a lot of the really famous early noir movies. I'm more familiar with more contemporary.
Now, when you say stuff. More famous, because I feel like there's the noir of the noir era, like the 40s into the 50s, and
That's
then,
what I mean.
But then there's like the 70s LA noir, which in a way I feel like that's when it really becomes the LA noir, which is Long Goodbye, Chinatown. I think those would be like the most identifying ones, but there are definitely others.
I'm less familiar with LA noir overall than I am with noir overall. I have seen a couple LA noir things. I've seen this, and I guess Chinatown, obviously. And then that, as much as I love Brian De Palma, the Brian De Palma Black Dahlia movie, I have seen that as well, which that movie has a whole host of problems of its own. Let's just put it that way.
I have not seen it, so I cannot speak about it.
It's fun. I don't remember. I mean, again, I don't remember it being a thing that I was very animated about, but again, I haven't seen it since it came out.
So just to name check a few others that I made a little list here. Long Goodbye in P.T. Anderson's Inherent Vice. I think of The Big Lebowski. It's a take on noir, but it's such a sort of a note for note subversion of The Big Sleep that I think of it as in the realm of LA noir. And then Under the Silver Lake, a recent entry. Have you seen Under the Silver Lake?
I have not.
Yeah, it's a complicated film that stirs complicated reactions, but I really liked it. And then I'm sure we're gonna be talking about The Nice Guys as well, which reunites Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger from LA Confidential. So, but we've talked around LA Confidential a lot. We haven't really gotten into it yet. This is your first watch. Talk about a little bit about. You said your reaction was that it was, you dug it.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. It's LA Confidential is a movie that, like I'd mentioned, I mean, I've heard nothing but good things about it. I obviously have heard of James Ellroy. So the book and everything I had heard of, it's just I don't know why I had never gotten around to it. So yeah, it was one of those things where everything I'd heard about it had been really good and positive, and I don't know. I just was never at the top of my list. Nobody ever asked me to watch it, and people had asked me if I had watched it, but I don't know. Sometimes that doesn't get the ball rolling enough to be like, oh, have you seen this? And then someone goes, oh, no, I haven't. And then like, oh, okay. If you leave it at that, it's like, well, maybe I don't need to watch it then. But when someone goes, oh, you haven't seen it, and oh my God, you haven't seen this, then it's like, all right, there's probably something to the quality of the movie being even better than just good. You know, there's something that makes it exemplary in a way, or, you know, so worth getting excited about if someone has not seen it. So LA Confidential is one of those movies.
Welcome to Los Angeles, the city of the future.
From the glitz and glamour
What do you do on the show, Jack?
I teach Brett Chase how to walk and talk like a cop.
to the greed and corruption,
I run call girls that look like movie stars.
everyone here has a secret,
You talk only to me.
and secrets can kill. See the movie everybody's talking about. 4 stars, says Roger Ebert. The best American movie of the year, says New York Magazine. LA Confidential, rated R.
So yeah, that is what we're talking about on this episode of the Culture Cast. So if you're a fan of LA Noire, folks, strap in, because I think this is probably the LA Noire movie of the most LA Noire movie of LA Noire movies that you could get. It covers everything. It goes most places that these movies tend to go separately, not all in the same piece. And this movie kind of goes everywhere. And it feels kind of almost like if there were never another LA Noire movie made after this movie, you might say, well, what else needed to be made?
Well, now you're going a little bit far, but sure.
But you know what I mean, right? Like the feeling of the movie and the way it presents itself is it's trying to encompass all the trappings of these kinds of movies into one cohesive, singular thing. I mean, there's the racism of that time in LA. There's the backstabbing political bureaucracy shit. There is some action, and I would say some like pretty gnarly violence as well. And there are big characters. And then there's even the entertainment angle of it being LA. Like, it kind of covers, you know what I mean? It covers almost all of the bases of the things you would want in this kind of movie. So yeah, maybe that is a little hyperbolic, but I mean, tack on to the fact that this is a James Ellroy book. Like, if we're talking the guy who writes this kind of stuff and is known for it, and then this is the adaptation, like, it's just, I don't know. There's a lot working in this movie's favor and very little working against it.
Yeah, and speaking of the adaptation, we had, at first when we talked about doing this, we thought we were talking about really digging into that. And then I listened to the Projection Booth podcast, and they did a great job on their episode about LA Confidential, really digging into the Ellroy novels and how they relate to the film. So I encourage people to check that out. I just want to say it is a phenomenal job of, I want to say phenomenal. It's almost like it's like a lesson in how to adapt a big sprawling novel into a perfectly concise film. And Brian Helgeland, who did that, is not a guy who has a lot of great screenplays to his credit. I say this as someone who acted in one of them, his screenplay for Nightmare on Elm Street for The Dream Master. And so it's also kind of amazing that he did this. And I feel like this took him to another level in Hollywood and as an artist. And I think in a way, when we look at this film, so many talents are coming to this film and kind of hitting their stride, as you referenced, talking about the actors at the beginning. But I think that's true of the director. I think that's true of the writer, particularly true of the director and the writer, and the 4 main actors in the film: Kevin Spacey, Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, and Kim Basinger. And to leave out James Cromwell, it's actually probably the
I was about to say,
peak James Cromwell.
I feel like you have to. I feel like James Cromwell has to be mentioned. I
Yeah.
think it's 5. I think it is 5.
Yeah. It's because all of these people, as you say, all of these people, and forgive me, I've never been that sympathetic to Kim Basinger as an actor. But let's say, for the sake of argument, all of these people have been in a lot of great films and given a lot of great performances. But there's something special about James Cromwell in this film that is maybe just a cut above everything else. And I think that's kind of what makes a great film a lot of the time, is that magical synchronicity of talents coming together at exactly the right moment so that it becomes something that's bigger than the people involved could have even imagined they would achieve. And of course, we should say James Ellroy hates the film, but who cares? Because he's, as we get into on The World Is Wrong a lot, sometimes the people who are the most wrong about a project are the people who worked on that project or had the project made from their work. So, but along those lines, I know you're not that deep in your experience of Curtis Hanson as a director, but have you seen any of his other films?
I have not. 8 Mile is a movie that has never motivated me, or I've never engaged with Eminem like that. Let me put it that way, as an artist. So it's just never been something that I've gravitated towards.
Then let me just give a little talk about him, because he is definitely hitting his stride here. He started doing sort of like cheesy he started like a lot of people doing cheesy low budget films. He was the director of Losing It, the film that introduced Tom Cruise to the world.
Right.
And then he directed The Bedroom Window and Bad Influence, films that I didn't particularly love. And then he took off with The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, River Wild, then LA Confidential, Wonder Boys, and 8 Mile. And I feel like that is a run of just... I tried to watch The Hand That Rocks the Cradle just this week because it had been a blind spot, and I couldn't get through it. It's just, it's too tense for me, but that's probably a sign of how good it is. But the other ones, The River Wild, LA Confidential, Wonder Boys, and 8 Mile are all really well-made films. And whatever you think about Eminem, a film like 8 Mile has no business being as good as it is. And I feel like that is entirely...
Sure.
Well, I don't want to say it's entirely, because there's certainly some charisma there with Eminem, but there was a lot of charisma there with Elvis, and they made a lot of bad movies with him. But yeah, no, 8 Mile is, if you hate Eminem, there may be a hurdle to your entry there. But I think if you watched it, you would still be struck with how well directed it is. And if you watched it in the context of River Wild, Wonder Boys, LA Confidential, you would see the hand of a kind of auteur, a workman auteur. But one of the things that's interesting about LA Confidential, which I find that it's what makes it such a good noir film, is if you watch Bad Influence and Bedroom Window, his 80s, and even though Bad Influence was a 90s thing, I think of it as an 80s film. It has sort of the cheesy, noirish quality that some 80s films have that don't feel like noir. They just feel more like 80s music videos, but just lots of blue light coming through windows and that kind of vibe. And somehow when he gets to LA Confidential, he's able to use all of that in the service of this film. And it really does come out as a noir feeling, as opposed to what it felt like in films like Bad Influence. Anyway, that's my take on Curtis Hanson. There are some interesting films after that, but we don't really need to get into it.
So tell me about your time with LA Confidential.
Oh, well, I think it was my first introduction to both Russell Crowe and Guy Pearce. And yeah, it blew me away. They were immediately both on my radar. I think it was the first time Kevin Spacey was playing someone in a film who wasn't a flat out creep. He was always I liked him from when he first showed up as an actor in the TV show Wise Guy, in like the late 80s. But by the time this film had come out, he had done Glengarry Glen Ross, in which he plays a creep. He was in The Ref, where he plays a very stressed out character. Swimming with Sharks, where he plays an evil agent. Usual Suspects, where he plays a creep. Seven, where he plays a creep. A Time to Kill, where he plays a racist DA. And then we get LA Confidential, and he's this charismatic actor who really has a heartbreaking death scene. I assume spoilers are okay here. We're not going to try and...
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. I will say spoilers, but you're right. Like, this is a movie worth checking out if you've never seen it. Take my word for it. I'd never seen it before, but I knew nothing about this movie going into it, and that scene where he dies, I was shocked.
It's a shocking scene. Yes.
It was as shocking as DiCaprio's murder in The Departed. Straight up. It had that same feeling to it. For me.
I got to say, I've watched like every time that happens, and I've watched that scene probably 20 times now in my life. It still has impact, even knowing it's coming. It's just the way it's shot. It's perfectly acted, edited. Like, yeah, it's just a really, really excellent. But I'm curious, what do you make of Kevin Spacey in this film? Because it really was the beginning of that, of his move, of the move that takes him to American Beauty and then into his more like, I want to be a likable actor guy. Because up till then, he had totally made his name playing skeezy guys. And there is something skeezy to Jack Vincennes, but it has a Dean Martin-y kind of vibe to it, which softens it. Obviously, that's not true in Seven.
Well, again, Kevin Spacey is an interesting actor. All of his whatever aside, again, to not wade into that because I don't frankly care, and that's his fucking problem and not mine, as they would say. Again, I only know what I've heard, and I'm not willing to make any judgment on it. I think Kevin Spacey excels at playing creeps for whatever reason, and it's weird to see him playing something that's meant to be likable, because I don't know, he just excels at playing creeps for whatever reason. Maybe it's just his inner id is able to come out a lot easier, but he's really good here. But I did have a hard time buying the nice guy part of who he is. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, not for me at all.
It's hard to buy it, only because, again, he's so good at being such a creep and a monster most of the time. But it's not a bad thing if you know your strengths in that regard.
Yeah, and I feel like what I think is one of the most interesting aspects of this film is its relationship to queerness, and the Kevin Spacey character, the Jack Vincennes character, and his relationship to the gay actor he sets up. And there's a scene between him and, what's the actor's name? Simon. He played The Mentalist.
Oh, Simon Baker?
Yeah. The scene where he sets Simon Baker up. I don't know if the film is intentionally doing this or if the director is subtle. I don't know where it's coming from, but in that scene, Kevin Spacey is I feel like he's coming out. He's saying, the way he looks at that Simon character, the way they talk, he's playing a closeted gay man who has, that's the feeling I get, is that he's playing, or maybe that's just because Kevin Spacey is that closeted gay man who is not closeting himself that much, but enough to be able to work in this world. And I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of this film. And again, going back to Curtis Hanson, that he is able to capture that and convey that in a way that I wasn't even, I intuited it at the time, but now when I watch it, it's undeniable. But did you get that from that scene?
Well, that's okay. So that's the interesting thing, obviously, also about Kevin Spacey as an actor. And again, like, if Kevin Spacey had not come out as gay, what, you know what I mean? Like, what would the subtext be? But I feel like you're right. Like, it's still there. Even without the confirmation of that, okay, like, in real life, this guy is also that. Like, to your point, like, it's interesting because it doesn't serve anything. It's just kind of there. I mean, it's not like they do anything with it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of this moment, and it's just kind of this moment. It doesn't necessarily go anywhere. But it is interesting because I think you're right.
Yeah, I think you would have picked up on it anyway, because I think that was always there. And I think this is one of the things that bugs me a little bit about the way we talk about Kevin Spacey, is that his queerness often got used to portray his characters as creepy.
Yeah. Or ambiguous.
And I do feel like the pile-on with Kevin Spacey is homophobic, regardless of that. Like, he has been accused by gay men as well. I think that the will to hate him is, yeah, I think it comes from a homophobic place, or it's driven in part by that, and so it makes me want to, if not defend Kevin Spacey, defend the people who might get wrapped up in the condemnation of Spacey, people who are like Spacey. That, again, there's something, this is what I love about this film, is that it, instead of using Spacey's queerness as an analog for creepiness, it uses his queerness as an analog for ambiguous morality, a kind of like a sympathy behind a hardness. Like, there's the cop face that he shows, but there's, in that scene with Simon Baker, there's this deep empathy, sympathy, pain, longing, like all of the things that come with having to be closeted.
Right.
And the way that, like, the compassion that his character shows just in his eyes for that character, I think that's what made Kevin Spacey, in the time that he was, a transcendent movie star, because he was able to flip that queer is creepy into queer is soulful. And then he's gone through what he's gone through, and recently he's been vindicated in court. So we should probably presence that as well. In the spirit of The World Is Wrong, we're always on the side of the one being attacked, and always in opposition to the attacking, judging mob of people online.
Twitter is always wrong.
Yes. Well, it's only because it's filled with people.
That's true. It's true. That's very true.
And you know what? I'll take them over AI any day. So.
Well, and I in terms of, again, not to defend or condemn, like, Kevin Spacey is in plenty of things that I really like. I mean, you mentioned Glengarry Glen Ross. I like that movie a lot. I like this movie a lot. So yeah, it's kind of, again, it's kind of hard to overlook it, but at the same time, like you said, homophobia is homophobia is homophobia. So part of it is going to be that, but also, you mentioned Dean Martin. I can't imagine Dean Martin wasn't a handsy guy. Or Bobby Darin, to even make a bigger, comparison. So I don't know. I just, it's a different kind of movie star type thing. And that's however you want to, like you said, however you want to define it is however anyone's going to define it. So,
but coming back to the film, I do feel like that is one of the strengths of this film that puts it over Chinatown, is that there is this soulful queerness to it, which comes through also in the Russell Crowe Guy Pearce relationship that Kim Basinger even presences. She says, you know, you're not fucking him, you're fucking me, or whatever. And so it's something that is all throughout this film. And maybe that's one of the things that bums James Ellroy out about it. I don't know. But it's one of the things that I find makes this film, even though it's harsh, it has my sympathy, because I feel like it has a sympathy that other harsh noir films don't have for the people who are the victims of that world. Like if you think of Chinatown, like I don't feel like that, and I love that film, but I don't feel like that film has a lot of sympathy for anyone but maybe Evelyn Mulwray and her kid. But even that, it treats her pretty bad. Whereas this film has and we can get into it, maybe this is a weakness of it, but there is something kind of cuddly about this brutal film. I think it comes from that.
Well, I mean, look, in the scope of where the movie ends up, you have 3 leads and only one of those leads die, and the other one gets shot through the face. Like, you know, it's like, I would agree, like most of these stories, these noir stories, the ending does not, they don't drive to Arizona at the end of the movie in most of these noir movies, is my point.
Yeah, and a lot of people really have issue with the ending of the movie, that it's too nice.
I guess I get it, but it's like the ending feels very Star Warsy. You know what I mean? It's like, and everybody lived happily ever after, and they got their medals, and they all went on and lived happier lives. It's like, I don't need to see what happens to these characters after this movie. You know what I mean? Like, I believe, but I believe they all lived happy lives. But I also completely understand that as a criticism, and a pretty big one against this movie, because it kind of bucks noir conventions while, you know, certain ones while embracing others. So
yes, and just our understanding of the history of the LAPD. Like, you get the feeling at the end of this movie that, okay, well, LAPD is cleaned up. It's going to be no problems there. Now Exley's there. And these people, you know, Bud White and Kim Basinger are going to go off into the sunset. And not only that, there's not even any jealousy left between Bud White and Exley, because when Kim Basinger kisses him on the cheek, it's all nice. There's jealousy doesn't exist anymore. Corruption doesn't exist anymore. Toxic masculinity doesn't exist anymore. It's just going to be great. LA is going to be a haven for arts and artists and wonderful people. And it's like, come on. Again, doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it while it was happening, but having to think about it afterwards is like, yeah, I can see why that would bum James Ellroy out. But Brian Helgeland's writing a Hollywood movie. Now, we haven't talked about Russell Crowe. We've talked about Spacey and Guy Pearce. What do you think about him in this?
I like him. Are we talking about Russell Crowe or Guy Pearce?
Russell Crowe.
Okay. I like Russell Crowe in this movie. My only thing is, like, I normally am not someone who gravitates towards Russell Crowe as an actor. I don't know why, but he's not someone who I would immediately go out of my way to watch his movies. I mean, I've seen Gladiator one time, you know, like he's not an actor who I watch a lot of his things intentionally. So seeing him in this was actually very pleasant surprise, because I really like him and he's really good in this, but I just don't have a familiarity with his body of work to have much of an opinion on him other than he's good in this.
Yeah. Did you see what's the Western he did?
3:10 to Yuma?
No, Quick and the Dead.
Oh, like 90s. Gotcha.
Did you see that?
I have not seen that.
Oh, that's really great. And I'm a big fan of a film that nobody really knows called Mystery Alaska, a hockey movie that he's in. But yeah, Gladiator is nonsense. Actually, by the time Gladiator happens, that's when he stops being interesting. He was really interesting, and then Gladiator, Proof of Life, A Beautiful Mind, Master and Commander, Cinderella. Like, yeah, then it's like I need some Oscars, and he doesn't really get interesting again. Well, I don't want to say until The Nice Guys, but that's.
I thought you were going to say Les Miserables, which is
no.
Boy, his performance in Les Miserables is interesting. That was an interesting choice to pick him for that movie, but I don't, like I said, I don't go out of my way to watch his stuff because of the thing you just said. Like, for the most part, when I think of Russell Crowe, I'm thinking of like mid 2000s Russell Crowe, where everything is just Oscar bait nonsense.
No, early on, like, yeah, he's really good on the come up, and I think there's something interesting in the older, shaggier, fat Russell Crowe. But it's great that we have this Bud White that is just on fire. This is a Brando level performance that he's giving us of that kind of a guy. A guy who's acting with his eyes and his body and his physicality as much as he is with his words. And then the combination when he and Guy Pearce get together, there's a chemistry between the two of these Australian actors doing American accents that is film perfection, right there, like as good as any two-hander you can imagine, I think.
I will say Guy Pearce's American accent is so convincing. it's as, I mean, I don't know what it is about Australian actors being able to do American accents so well, but he just, I mean, and Russell Crowe too, obviously, but Guy Pearce, if you had told me he was American, I would believe you. Like, that's how convincing it is. There's not a hard R in there. That's how, the Brits, whenever they do American accents, it's, the hard R. But there's none of that because obviously, again, like, he's Australian, but Australians, for whatever, just nail the American accent. And like this specific one too. I mean, they both nail it so well, but Guy Pearce just, it's like, it seems effortless probably because it is.
Well, probably not effortless. He took some effort.
He makes it seem, He makes it seem effortless. Like, it's so, I mean, it's like the American accent Hugh Laurie does. It's like, if I didn't know you were British, I would not have realized it by the way you talk, because when he plays House, it's just so convincing. And that, I mean, that's the thing. Like you mentioned, this is a quote all American story set in LA, but one of the actors, the lead actor of the three main characters, there's only one that's American. The other two are Australian.
Yeah.
But again, can't tell.
Yeah. Again, you wouldn't. There's something counterintuitive about film that sometimes that just works. You would, on paper, when Hansen and Helgeland brought this to the studio, I'm sure you could look at that studio list and they're like, not just that they're Australian, but they're unknowns. I'm sure that they wanted, Keanu Reeves to play Exley at that time, or someone like that. And great that they didn't. And this is where I want to mention the casting director, Mally Finn. I worked with her many, many years ago, and her work casting this film, and just as a casting director in general, keep an eye out for that name. It's Mali Finn, Finn. She's no longer with us, but she cast some amazing films. And I should say, the director who cast me against her wishes. She was not particularly a fan of mine. I don't care. She's really, really good. She cast Mission Impossible, like the stuff she was casting around this time, Mission Impossible, A Time to Kill. She cast Titanic. So she was casting some big films, but did an amazing job casting LA Confidential. I would say that that's one of the stealth stars of the film, is the flawless casting throughout, where I would say maybe the weakest is Kim Basinger, and she won an Oscar. So what do I know?
Well, speaking of Oscars, I was surprised how few people were nominated. Specifically, the person I want to mention, James Cromwell. How was he not nominated for supporting actor for this movie? Like, he's such a standout. I mean, again, not saying he isn't always a standout. From, being on, several episodes of Barney Miller to the movie he would win an Academy Award for with Babe. Like, he has such versatility as an actor. But the thing that I love about his performance is when he's an American actor playing an Irishman, covering up his accent when he's trying to come across as an all-American police officer, but it keeps slipping through, and he lets it down when he's beating the shit out of people, because then he wants to get back to whatever his roots are, clearly.
You betcha, boy.
And he's not as... Yeah, exactly. And it's so fucking good. I would actually go as far as to say he's my favorite part of the movie, because he is beyond menacing. In a way that, again, James Cromwell does really well, and he does it to perfection. I mean, he's the perfect villain for this movie.
Yeah, and such a soft-talking, likable villain. And another, going back to what Brian Helgeland did really brilliantly, is in the book, Exley's relationship with his father is a big deal, but in the film, his father is dead, and a lot of the lines and the dialogue that happens between Exley and his father becomes dialogue between Exley and James Cromwell's character. And I feel like that father, like making that character fatherly, is a really great trick of the script.
Well, it makes the reveal that much more shocking. The moment when Kevin Spacey gets murdered, it makes that scene that much more shocking, because it really comes out of nowhere. Because, like you mentioned, they draw you in so well. They bait you into the trap so well, because James Cromwell is, again, so likable most of the time. I mean, yeah, he's kind of a skeezy dick in this movie, but he's still, you don't get the sense that he's, going to start murdering his own people until he does.
Well, and you didn't even really get that sense before, and this, like, you sort of thought he was a cop in the old school style.
Right.
And even when he's killing Kevin Spacey or about to kill, when he busts into the thing at the end and starts shooting people, he's still very friendly about it. Oh, boyo, do you have a benediction for me? He's not like, it's all very nice. I'm just killing you. That's all I'm doing. It's all very nice.
Which is much more horrifying.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
The banality
Great
of
choice.
evil. Like, he's just so... Well, and again, like, that's why it's perfect, is because it's the police captain. Like, it's the guy, he's there in the building, he's your boss, and he's also the one subverting the law. Like, and that's what makes it... I mean, that's what makes the twist with Kevin Spacey work so well, and that's what makes his role work so well, is, like you said, I mean, transferring the paternal aspects of the character onto him from the Guy Pearce's, character in the book. I think it just allows you as an audience to really get drawn into the world and not think, oh, there's something more going on here, until all of a sudden there is. Like, that, the scene with Kevin Spacey kind of happens without note. You don't think anything of it until all of a sudden Kevin Spacey's dead.
With really mean, cold bullet holes. Like, it feels like there's not even any blood in it. These are just like, there's a line, I don't know if it's Dashiell Hammett, it's like talking about eyes or bullet holes that looked like punches in the snow, or so. I'm sure I'm just totally ruining that line, but there is something, again, that's the direction. It's very... It reminds me, did you see the film Munich, the Spielberg film?
When it came out, yeah, long
there's
time ago.
The way that the kills are in that, they're just, the bullet holes are more like just like holes in people's chests than like these bloody explosions. And there's something about that to me is more horrific than gorier bullet-riddled scenes. I don't know why. There's something about that, and I saw that in the squibs they used in that scene gave that same impression. We're not really talking about Kim Basinger, though. I feel like we should give her due. Wait, did I interrupt you? Or did you want to talk about the bullet holes?
No. I was just gonna say, I think what I appreciate about the way the movie handles a lot of the violence and the usage of the gore that is in the movie is it is very matter of fact about it. You get shot in the heart, you die. You bleed out and die. The end. Like, it's not.
Unless you're Russell Crowe.
Right. Well, right. Which again, I'm sure we'll get to the whack ending of the movie. But the reason we're not really talking about Kim Basinger is I think you kind of mentioned it already. Kim Basinger inhabits a weird section of actresses for me that I just like. I don't. It's not that I don't have anything against them. I just don't understand. Maybe I just never have understood why they're being cast in so many things and what the appeal is. Because like Kim Basinger is fine. I just an Academy Award, like it's just kind of strange, right?
To me, I mean, the Academy Awards are always strange, so I don't really.
Sure, well, yeah, well, taking that aside, I've never understood her appeal personally, and that's just me. Like maybe I've never seen her maybe I haven't seen the Kim Basinger role.
No, this is, I think, the Kim Basinger role.
Okay, well, then I kind of go back to what I said before. Then,
yeah, I'm the same way. I can't help but feel like there's just something. It's not even her fault. It's just like Hollywood fell in love with the image of Kim Basinger as sort of some blonde ideal of movie stardom.
Right.
And
a modern day Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah. And I just feel like, I could think of other actresses from Julianne Moore to Barbara Hershey, or I don't know, plenty of other interesting actors and actresses who didn't get the platform that Kim Basinger got. And it's really unfair to Kim Basinger for me to think that way. Although, of course, I can think any way I want, because it's not. I have no antipathy towards her. She has every right to take the roles that were offered to her, and it's more. I'm confused by Hollywood's decision to anoint her the way it did, instead of any other number of actresses who I just think are more compelling. But I've felt this. There are plenty of other actors who I have felt this way about, from
same
Patrick Swayze to, I'm just outing everyone loves Patrick Swayze.
No.
I never liked Patrick Swayze. So
I'm with you on that one.
For a long time, I didn't like Tim Robbins on film, and then he started directing films, and then I gained huge respect for him as an artist, and now I really like him as an actor. So a lot of that, this is what we get into in The World Is Wrong. Just because I don't like something doesn't mean that thing is bad.
Right.
But I think it is weird that in a film with so many amazing performances, Kim Basinger won the Oscar, which is, again, more of an indictment of the Oscars than of Kim Basinger. So I think we've given her the best attention we can under the circumstances.
I actually liked her in Cellular, which is the other thing I have seen her in. She's pretty good in that, but that is like a real deep cut, random, like mid-2000s movie. It's kind of in that same milieu of like Phone Booth. Like a weird movie about new technology being used in a weird way. But she's fine in that, playing kind of a mom who's talking to Chris Evans on the phone the entire movie. She's fine.
And I made you watch The Nice Guys, which you hadn't seen before this, because it was the reunion of Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger, and because I feel like that film is in conversation with LA Confidential,
Agreed.
Shane Black's The Nice Guys. What did you think of Kim Basinger in that film?
I think she's good. Obviously she is opposite Russell Crowe again. So, I will say I liked their chemistry in LA Confidential.
Oh yeah, I totally
I
bought
think they
that.
have good chemistry. So at least there is that. Like,
And she's very, very good in LA Confidential. There's nothing embarrassing or wrong about the performance. She plays the role and delivers it exactly. Like, I can't imagine someone doing that role better, doing it differently perhaps, but I think and clearly it worked because all of her relationships I buy. Even the unspoken relationship, we never really see her with David Strathairn. Oh, I guess we see her in the car with him at the beginning, but
right.
Even the way she talks about him, I feel their relationship. So it is a very, very solid performance from, again, just an actor I'm less sympathetic towards than other actors.
Right. Yeah, you said one name, so I will give one as well. Robin Wright is another actress that just doesn't resonate with me personally, but I know that she's in great things and I know she's a great actress. So same thing. I like Kim Basinger in this, but like you said, the Academy Awards they are what they are, and they have made their own, group of mistakes. I mean, the thing that was more surprising when looking at the Academy Award stuff is how little this did win and how little this was nominated for.
Helgeland won an Oscar, though, for the screenplay.
Right.
So that's good.
I was just surprised more of the actors didn't get recognition.
Yeah. I'm right with you. But again, they were unknown at the time, and the Oscars tend to reward either known quantities or maybe there's a little bit of anti-Aussie prejudice. I wanted to say one thing on the Robin Wright thing. I really recommend seeing State of Grace, the Phil Joannou film with Sean Penn and Gary Oldman. And she has some scenes in that they might not turn you around on liking her or being drawn to her, but whew, boy, she matches those two guys in intensity, which is not easy to do.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, Kim Basinger holds her own against a pretty intense Russell Crowe towards the end of the movie.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Russell Crowe is an intense actor. That is the thing that I can say with absolute certainty. That's what comes through in all of his roles for me that I've seen him in, is he's an intense dude.
Oh, and I want to going back to The Nice Guys, an interesting little, I don't know if it's a synchronicity or if it was something that Shane Black intended, but Sarah Halley Finn, who is the daughter of Mally Finn, was the casting director on The Nice Guys. So I can imagine maybe Shane Black just being like, get me the casting director from that other film that was so perfectly cast. And she was like, oh, let's go back to the Russell Crowe, Kim Basinger well.
Well, and The Nice Guys is a really fun movie. I have not seen Ryan Gosling in enough things, and now I've seen him in The Nice Guys and Barbie within the span of 2 weeks, and I really like Ryan Gosling.
That's so funny.
He plays that character really well in The Nice Guys. Like, it's a perfect counterpoint to Russell Crowe kind of playing a similar character, the one he plays in LA Confidential.
I love it. I feel like it was just a week ago we were talking. You're like, I'm not that into Ryan Gosling. And I was like, yeah, you need some gateway Gosling. Check out The Nice Guys. Now you're like, I love that guy.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, again, when they give him an opportunity to be charismatic, he really shines. I mean, again, we talked about Blade Runner 2049 off air, but I mean, he's good in that. It's just that it's a different kind of role. And in The Nice Guys, it's more in line with what he's doing in Barbie, kind of playing this harried guy who just can't seem to get the ground underneath him long enough to stand up and feel comfortable. And I like that. And he plays that really well.
Yeah.
But Russell Crowe is really good in that movie too, because again, he's playing very similar to what he's doing in LA Confidential. I would say it's a little toned down, but that also comes with Russell Crowe being, almost 20 years older.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, he's another bruiser. But in this case, like in LA Confidential, his bruiser is driven by this passion to protect women. And in LA Confidential, he doesn't seem like he's driven to do anything. Which I love the broken man quality of his character in The Nice Guys. Yeah, that's another sort of perfect two-hander between him and Gosling, just like between him and Guy Pearce in LA Confidential. There was one other point about LA Confidential that I wanted to talk with you about, because watching it this time, thinking about it, I couldn't help but notice the ways that it functions as propaganda while sort of taking credit for being about the corruption of the police. And
they're dealing with it from within, Andros. Don't you understand? It's always like, still a lot of corrupt cops, though. You just dealt with like a handful, guys.
Well, just sort of like, let's just think about these characters. So we have Exley, who is the politician, and he's the one who's going to come in and clean up the system. And we have Bud White, who is the bad LA cop, the kind of guy, and this is 1990s, so we got to think of it in the context of when they were making it. Bud White is the kind of cop who beat up Rodney King. That's
right. Exactly.
And by the way, James Cromwell, very physically, he has a lot of similarities to Daryl Gates, who was the chief of police in LA during that time. So this is a film that is, even though it's about the 40s, it's also about the 90s and the LA Police Department. And in this version, we have this. So we have the young firebrand who's going to clean up the system. We have the bad cop, but he's not really that bad because he protects women. He may sort of like the hand waving, and he may be a racist, he may be working for the mob, but he protects women, and that makes him a good guy. He's down deep. He's a good guy. He's not a brutal racist, abusing his power. No, he's a guy who protects women. And then Jack Vincennes, he's the sort of if Bud White represents the brutality, the corruption of brutality, then Jack Vincennes is more the corruption of the relationship of the police department with the main industry in Hollywood. And instead of being a sleazy guy taking advantage of these people, we get him as a guy who is coded as potentially a closeted gay man who has great sympathy for these people he's setting up, and he's very conflicted. And then, of course, he has the tragic death that, we all feel when it happens. So we have these, even though the story is about this LAPD that's rife with corruption, it's also the story about how 3 good cops changed the system. And it allows us to sort of revel in the corruption and the ugliness while getting to feel safe and like everything is returned to order. When in the 1990s, we know that's not true.
Right. I was going to say, I actually, thinking of something that kind of operates as propaganda, but I'm a huge fan of it. The Amazon series Bosch, which takes place in LA.
Oh yeah, totally. We should talk about that, because Bosch definitely feels like an LA noir for a TV.
Well, and Bosch feels like Bud White in a lot of ways. Like he's a little bit of Bud White and he's a little bit of Exley. Like he's a little bit of all three, because they never allow him to go full ape shit because he knows better. and again, Bud White knows better too. He's weaponized to not care. But then Bosch also has that kind of the politician thing of understanding. It's not really a politician thing. I mean, it's just understanding how to maneuver within the system and how to play what people's wants and needs are off of one another. Like, I mean, that's all Exley is doing. I mean, that's called being a politician, but I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's also being very bureaucratic and very smart about conflict resolution. That's the thing about the Exley character that I think ultimately works for me. And that's the thing that, like I said, you kind of see it in the Bosch TV show, is just an understanding of how the system works, the justice system, and then the cop system itself. And that's, I like that about the Guy Pearce character. And I like it obviously just as much with the Bosch character.
Yeah. And I'm with you. It's I think that, let's unpack this a little bit. If you can recognize something as propaganda, which means that you recognize that
Right.
it's not telling the true story of the police, but a flattering story of an organization that has some has definitely ugly history and probably ugly present, and yet we enjoy them. Our rational brain may recognize that we are being propagandized, but another part of ourself just relaxes into these, what are really sort of fascist fairy tales. And I think it's something that I contend with in terms of my viewing. Why do I'm incapable of just mindlessly lapping up a Mission Impossible film that's celebrating the, spies and murderers. But I love them. I think I wonder about the people who are able to watch those things and and never even engage the part of the mind that is saying, well, what is this trying to teach me about how the world works that is not the truth? When you watch films like that, are you like me? Do you toggle back and forth between, oh, come on, and oh, yes, get him.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, obviously, as someone who's watched a fair amount of propaganda from the 70s, I mean, Barney Miller and Columbo are both like propaganda adjacent, if not full on propaganda. And like, it's what's interesting about it is, you mentioned it with LA Confidential. The Nice Guys, not so much, because that's more like
detectives,
PIs and private detectives and stuff, which is its own world, and a world worth mining as well, obviously. But what's interesting is, like, I do think about it, obviously, because I watch so much of this kind of stuff just already. Like I said, I watch Barney Miller, I watch Columbo for the respective shows that I work on on Weirding Way with Mike White. And so, like, it's kind of hard to not think about the propaganda and, again, like, here are the good cops in the system. I mean, look, it's like anything else. I mean, we're not talking about white supremacists and Nazis here. We're talking about the police in this country, which there are people who work in the police that are good cops. It's just,
but there are that are also white supremacists and Nazis.
Right. Exactly. And that's the problem. It's like anything else. It's like anything when you talk about putting people into groups. If people are in groups, that means that, there are a bunch of people in a group or more than one people. And the more people you add, the less you know about everybody's background 100%. And that's the thing. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of groups or organizations. And then add on top of that, these people are given the power to police as they see fit in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's hard to come to terms with it because I don't know what there is to do other than acknowledge it, speak to it the best we can, but not like, I mean, Mike and I don't bring it up on every episode. I think we've brought it up like a handful of times. You know what I mean? Like, people would get sick and tired of hearing on every episode, oh, by the way, we have to, let's again say, there's problems with cops in this country right now. Like, people would stop tuning in if we just kept saying it. We all know.
Well, I think there's
but there's, I want to see stories told about cops because that's an interesting profession. It just is. Like, and the things that they can deal with are so different from what an accountant would run into on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, generally, I prefer movies about criminals or private eyes to ones that are really just about the cops, because I feel, again, there's an agenda that like, you can tell there's an agenda that is driving this. And I love this film. I turned you onto it. I told you should watch it. But there is definitely an agenda that's driving the film LA Confidential that is not just, let's make a good movie, but let's make a movie that gives people the catharsis of going to get those bad cops who beat up on Rodney King, and the happy feeling at the end of like, okay, well, now we can trust the cops, where nothing has actually changed. We just watched a movie. And going to that, like, and I feel like there are a lot of other groups that could be shown just as positively or with a fair ambiguity, that just you never see them positively, right. Whether it's the people we call terrorists who in other circumstances might be seen as freedom fighters, or the people we call drug dealers who in other situations we could call, enterprising entrepreneurs, is making the best right. of like trying to, like, cops are making tons of money off the drug war. Our movies about cops don't address that, even though all the money that is made off seizures and different other things, that doesn't play into it unless we're making a movie about it. So it's one of these things, as a movie fan, that I find myself, as a fan of movies and a fan of history, I'm going to say a fan of history, a student of history, that movies are propaganda. And that's what LA Confidential is telling us, which kind of brings us around to why I love this film, is that even though it is doing all of this propaganda work that I don't love, it still is ultimately a detective story about people seeking out corruption that really does exist and challenging it. And somehow this movie is able to walk both sides of the street, satisfy both needs. And I think that's what makes it a great film.
Well, and I think that primarily hinges on the Russell Crowe character, because like you mentioned at the beginning of the film, yeah, we understand that he protects women and that he's got this, chip on his shoulder about women being abused and mistreated. But then we see him engage in the bloody Christmas stuff in the jail. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, so this guy's a hothead. But I mean, again, by the end of the movie, like we mentioned, him and Guy Pearce have gone on this journey together and now are trying to root out the corruption that Russell Crowe was part of. I mean, again, he was weaponized by James Cromwell's character, for most of the movie, and he was going and kind of doing, again, it's those things about, the things that James Cromwell asks Guy Pearce at the beginning of the movie. He's like, would you be willing to shoot somebody in the back that is guilty just to make it easier so there aren't lawyers' fees and stuff? And Guy Pearce is like, no, I would not do it. I refuse. And obviously there's a fantastic payoff with that, but it also speaks to the other protagonist of the movie, the Russell Crowe character, because he's kind of the flip side of Exley. He feels he's just as morally righteous. He's just kind of in a more gray area. Morally gray area and legally gray area too, obviously. But by the end of the movie, he comes around more or less completely.
But there's no room in the newly clean LAPD for even a reformed Bud White, which again is just such a lie. But
well, and that's, oh my God. So that is the other thing. So let's talk about the end of the movie. So we have a shootout at the Victory Motel, and Russell Crowe should be dead, doesn't die, makes no sense why he doesn't. James Cromwell has the gun on Guy Pearce, and of course Guy Pearce says the Rollo Tomasi line, which is I think one of the best little pieces of kind of callback in this movie. Is the story then becomes a piece of information that in that moment when Guy Pearce is talking to James Cromwell and he says it to him, that might be the best scene in the movie, because the look on Guy Pearce's face is just you can see, if you pause it, the moment all the puzzle pieces lock into place in that scene, and he's like, oh no. But then we have the payoff at the end of the movie where he says it again to James Cromwell, and then he's like, I made it up, you fucking moron. but the problem then becomes the way the movie actually wraps up with James Cromwell getting shot in the back by Guy Pearce, and he's essentially telling him, I'll make you a fucking king, kid. All you got to do is let me live. I'll sing your praises, and I'll help be the kind of the boost to the top of the LAPD that you need. And Guy Pearce doesn't want to make a deal with the devil, so he shoots James Cromwell, coming full circle with the story. And then we have a coda tacked on that is so unneeded. So unneeded. And almost at odds with the entire movie.
Well, let me just say, I would say that not the part where Exley is now being interrogated, and he's behind the two-way mirror, and he does the trick where he knows what they're saying and he knows just how to manipulate them, and that's where it should have ended. It should have ended right there, because that button is great. It's what happened, and then we could have just been left with, he's alone in there. He's alone, but he's smarter than everyone. And it's just the character. He's hated by the system, but he's worked the system against itself. That's the end of the movie. Instead...
And there's ambiguity as to whether or not Russell Crowe survives.
And there's ambiguity as to whether or not he's going to get away with it. We don't know if they're going to buy it. We don't know if they're going to just be corrupt and shut him out. But what we do know is they know he's smarter than they are. And end of movie. That would have been perfect. But continue.
But then we get Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger going off to Arizona together.
Well, first we get Exley getting promoted in a system. Yeah.
Again, for the second time in the movie.
And then we get him walking out of... So he got the victory, then he walks out, and Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger are going to Arizona. And she kisses him on the cheek. And true noir fans' hearts break. There is nothing darker in this movie than the darkness and the cynicism behind putting that happy ending on it.
Yeah. It's so unneeded. It's so strange. It's like a bubblegum ending to a meal that bubblegum should not be served in front of. I don't know, so anything. I mean, who's eating bubblegum at the end of a meal, like a big piece of pink bubblegum? That's the problem. It's not just like a palate cleansery ending that puts a button on the movie, because that's what the scene before that scene was. It just, for whatever reason, just goes full saccharine. And I don't get it. Who are they pandering to, and why? The test audiences just wanted Russell Crowe's character to be alive so badly. It's I guess. I mean, look, he gets shot in the face. I get that he gets shot right in the face, in the cheek, in the perfect spot where all it would do is just blow your mouth open, essentially, and, destroy your ability to eat for the rest of your life, I guess. Or in Russell Crowe's case, he just has a little band-aid there.
Yeah.
It's so kind of hinky all of a sudden. It just, for a movie that does such a good job at existing in more or less a grounded reality, where the movie ends up is just kind of really I would almost say infantile in a sense. It just what is this movie all of a sudden? This is not the same movie I've been watching for almost 2 hours or over 2 hours.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. Helgeland fell back on his old habits at the end. But again, I don't know This is where I wonder how much political pressure comes to bear on a film that is addressing something that is as hot button as that was at the time, which is the reputation of the LAPD. Like, what pressures come to bear on that production? I don't know.
Right.
To make it even rosier. I don't know. I don't know if that's a voluntary thing. I mean, I guess we'll never know. But the filmmakers certainly know that the audience's response to that decision is a negative one. And I'm sure they probably, well, Curtis Hanson is no longer with us, but I would imagine Brian Helgeland would agree that the film would have ended on a stronger note, doing it the way I suggest, rather than how it was done. But this wouldn't be the first time.
Well, it doesn't need it. It's just unneeded. That's all it is. Like, it gilds the lily, right? Yeah. It's so strange. It's such an upbeat ending for such a more or less not upbeat movie. Like, it is kind of glossy noir, but it's not hyper glossy to the point where we can't treat the audience like adults and kind of have to treat them like little kids and be like, oh, and everybody got a happy ending in the end. It's like, what? That's not what the point of the story was to begin with.
Not everybody,
like,
not Leland Buzz Meeks or Dudley.
Sure. But the people I'm talking about
Jack
that were meant to obviously, yeah. He's the only
the
one.
Mentalist. Honestly, things don't go well for him.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, in terms of like the main characters, it's just for a noir movie, there's a low body count in terms of main characters. So I don't know if Russell Crowe being dead at the end would have changed anything, but a little bit more ambiguity as to his outcome as opposed to just a Band-Aid over his face. Yeah. It kind of is just very not at all what I was expecting when the movie kind of plays out the last 10 minutes. So I honestly thought it was just going to end with him shooting James Cromwell in the back, and then, because you could have even ended it there. Like, again, like, you don't even have to say anything in that moment. If you're engaged as an audience member, you'll understand what the filmmaker is trying to say by showing you James Cromwell being shot in the back by Guy Pearce. Like, they've already touched on those themes in the movie several times. So they don't have to reiterate it again for you. But the movie does. And it's symptomatic of, I think, like we've already mentioned, it's symptomatic of other things that this movie could not control at all.
Yeah.
I will ask you, since kind of we've gone around the bend with LA Confidential, is this the noir movie for you?
Oh, no. This is a modern noir. Like, the noir movie for me is like the true noir movies for me are the films from the 40s, the true noir. I mean, Citizen Kane is probably the greatest noir film. And, even though it doesn't fit a lot of the obvious tropes, but the Maltese Falcon, I could go we just did did an episode recently on the World Is Wrong podcast about the films of John Farrow, Mia Farrow's father, and he has some real dark, brutal films. Five Came Back is one that sticks with me. But I do think it's the best 90s noir film, that's for sure. And it definitely is in the tops of the LA noir that happen in the shadow of Chinatown. So yeah, and even though we've been critical of some aspects about it, none of them are deal breakers to me. I'll watch this film again in the next few years, and then again, this is one of my movies that I will go back to over and over.
Right. Well, and I agree with I agree with you. I will revisit this movie probably frequently and often because it's a great movie. I enjoyed it immensely, and yeah, I have other noir movies that motivate me more, but this is one that's just like easy to put on. It's not that it doesn't ask much of you as an audience member, but it does a lot of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, it does what a good Hollywood movie should do. It takes you from scene or action to action, but it's surprising in the way it does it. And even when you know that stuff's coming, the film is so well put together that it still has the capacity to surprise or move you.
Yeah. And, I think also the cast, elevates this higher up than so many other kind of things that I've seen, because again, it's so well cast and so perfectly put together that that in and of itself makes it one to revisit because of the cast alone. Just the three leads of the movie, and then add on James Cromwell. And we didn't even mention Danny DeVito is in the movie as well.
He's great.
In a bit part. And yeah, he's fantastic, but it's kind of he shows up a couple times and there you go. He shows up a couple times. He's not a main character, but even he's perfectly cast. So yeah, this is a movie that I'm really glad I finally sat down and watched. I really enjoyed it. So,
well, that's a great beginning to our movie friendship. Turning each other on to films that we haven't seen. Now it's your turn to turn me on to something.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna have to think about it and come up with something. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think.
Yeah, I'm not trying. It'll come up naturally in our conversation.
I gotta think. Yeah, because I do have nothing has come out yet organically. Because that's the thing you kind of mentioned. This watching LA Confidential kind of came out of a conversation that we had organically. Neither one of us went into that conversation expecting that LA Confidential was even going to come up. So, that's the fun thing about it. And yeah, like you mentioned, you were like, oh, LA Confidential. I was like, I've never seen it. And it's like, you need to watch it. And you're like, you're totally right. I did need to watch it. And it is that good of a movie. And if you have not seen it and you have stuck around to the end of this episode, you should have watched it already.
Because we just ruined it for you.
2/3 of the way through it by now. Yeah, we ruined it for you, but you also could have gotten 2/3 of the way through the movie by now. So yeah, no. Andras, final thoughts on Kitchen Confidential. That's a different show. That's a different show entirely. Yeah. And a book actually. Andras, final thoughts on LA Confidential.
Yeah, it's just a great gateway film to a lot of fantastic artists. I hope it encourages people to check out more of Curtis Hanson's work. We've all had a lot of Guy Pearce and Kevin Spacey and Russell Crowe in the interim. But if you are a fan of any of their work, I think you said at the beginning, this might be the best thing from any of them, including James Cromwell. And so we've lodged some of our misgivings, but as I said before, none of them matter when you're watching the film. They matter when you are going to do a podcast and have to talk about the film, but none of these things are deal breakers for me in my enjoyment of the film. And there's so much that's good there that, I encourage everyone to check it out. And as I said before, there's a lot we didn't get into in this about the translation from book to screenplay, and they did a great job on the Projection Booth podcast about that. So lots of LA Confidential to explore for you out there.
Yeah, and I'm in the same kind of camp. This is a great movie that I'm glad I finally got around to watching, and I enjoyed it immensely. And yeah, I think for me the three leads, I have not seen Kevin Spacey, Guy Pearce, and Russell Crowe in. I'm not like huge fans of their filmographies, but this is a massive success between the three of them. And then outside of the three of them, everything else is so well cast, well thought out, well done. Even with an actress who, again, I just normally am not gravitating towards. She's fantastic. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this movie immensely, and I'm glad I finally sat down and watched it because it's a really good movie. So
it's no two Jakes.
Even better than really good. Yeah, well, what is really? I still, to your point from that episode of your show, I wish they had done the third movie.
Oh, yeah.
I know. Maybe it would have redeemed the two Jakes a little bit. Like that for me ultimately is the sad thing about that movie is that there's no third movie to kind of hang the hat on and say, well, second one was kind of middle of the road, but the third one brought it all back. We never got that opportunity, so it is kind of a bummer.
But speaking of that, can you imagine, like, they could do an LA Confidential 2 with with Exley and Bud White, because they're still both alive. Like LA, like as them as old LA cops in the 80s. I don't know.
Yeah, I would watch that. I mean, hell, I would watch that in a heartbeat. Why not? They're both, I mean, pretty much most of the principal cast of the movie is still around. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, hey, if James Ellroy didn't like the movie anyways, why not just do whatever the hell you want with the next thing? I mean, if he already is just going, well, it's a loss because I don't like it. I mean, then just, do whatever the hell you want. I'd be game. I'd watch more. I'd watch whatever. With Guy Pearce and Russell Crowe doing this again. I think that could be interesting for sure. So
cool. Well,
So, Andras, if people want to check out your show and the things that you work on, where can they go?
Well, go to the worldiswrongpodcast.com. That's the website, or you can just look up the World is Wrong podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I also have a podcast called The Radio 8 Ball Show, or just Radio 8 Ball, all one word with the number 8. And that's a musical divination show where we answer questions by picking songs at random and interpreting them like musical tarot cards. And you can find out all about me, my music, my films, my books, my podcasts at my own website, which is previouslyyours.com. Also, you can get there just by searching for andrasjones.com. And again, thanks for having me on the podcast.
No, thank you for joining me. It's been fun, and it's not often I get to have a new person on the show. So I obviously really enjoy it. So, and I enjoy the candor and your opinion, and you being kind of like, let's watch this movie. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So. No, I'm totally I'm totally on board with wherever we go from here. But if you want to hear more of what I've already done, head on over to weirdingwaymedia.com, which is the podcast network that I co-founded with Mike White. And we have plenty of shows, including the Culture Cast, the Projection Booth, all kinds of things to check out. All great podcasts worth listening to. You can find them all at weirdingwaymedia.com. As for this show, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast. Big thanks as always to our Patreon supporters. August on the Culturecast right now is Mickey Rourke month, which was programmed by a Patreon supporter. So if that's something you want to do, pick the movies we watch, that's where you can go to do it. Andras, thank you so much again for joining me. This has been fantastic.
Yes, it has. I've had a blast, and I hope we get to do it again soon.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.